You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
We're going to talk about the future, and we're going to talk about the future of fuels. And when most people talk about the future of fuels, they talk about one thing that is the future. That's EVs. There's more than that, and that's our conversation today. Joining us is John Eichberger. He is Executive Director of the Transportation Energy Institute, and the Institute just published a new research paper looking at e-fuels. So welcome once again to the program, John.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Glad to be back.
So e-fuels, it is electrofuel, and that's what makes the E, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Can you, before we dive into the research and all this other stuff, can you kind of walk us through what electrofuel, e-fuel is?
Yeah, so to really get in, let's start with a quick concept. There's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's a lot of carbon dioxide being produced from industrial purposes. And what e-fuels allow us to do is take that carbon and recycle it. And so by capturing carbon out of the air or capturing carbon from industrial facilities and then using renewable electricity and water, we can actually produce a variety of different fuels. We can produce gasoline, we can produce diesel, we can produce aviation fuel, we can produce biofuels like ethanol and methanol, natural gas. All of these products that can be used in transportation, we can produce them by using that captured carbon, using renewable electricity, and producing a fuel that is compatible with our existing vehicles, compatible with our existing infrastructure, doesn't require any investment in equipment, and can go in and help reduce the carbon emissions from transportation by creating that carbon cycle and capitalizing on the availability of what's already out there. So there is a fantastic technology that if we can scale it to where it can actually produce enough volume at a price that's competitive, it could really do a lot in terms of helping us achieve our environmental objectives in the transportation sector.
So it sounds like the main focus right now is it's not affordable. It exists. It makes an awful lot of sense. My first question was going to be, why isn't everybody talking about this? We actually have. A year ago, we did a podcast talking about what's going on with the manufacturer of this and how the technology is playing out in Germany. But there's a difference between technology performing and technology performing at a level that is affordable. And I guess that's really what we're looking at right now.
We're at the early stages of the technology. We know how to do it. There's several different processes that can be employed to produce these fuels. So the technical knowledge is there. There's certain technologies and processes that need to be further developed to improve the efficiency. But the bottom line is it is expensive. Right now, you're looking at 2.5 to 4 times more expensive than gasoline to produce. That can come down. But I think that the big thing here is we're looking at a future fuel. It's not going to be on the market tomorrow. It's going to take us time to bring those costs down and scale up. As production increases, as we get more mature in the processes, costs will come down. Policies are going to help a lot. If we keep certain policies in place, then I think we have the ability to bring these fuels to market at a competitive price in the next decade or two. But it is going to take some time, and that's the real reason. What I like about the whole concept of e-fuels is, you started the program talking about electrification, but there's other stuff. In Europe, when they decided to ban sale of combustion engine vehicles in 2035, you mentioned Germany. The Germans came and said, whoa, we need an exclusion for combustion engines that run on e-fuels or zero carbon fuels. The idea being there's an opportunity here. Performance of liquid fuels is fantastic. Liquid is the most portable source of energy. So if we can preserve the utilization of liquid fuel products in a zero carbon or a very low carbon market, that is really the best opportunity. And what I like about the e-fuels is they are an example of what we might be able to achieve if we allow innovation to continue to drive us towards our objectives. These policies that are designed to force one solution and one solution only will fail. There's no gray area in my mind. I think anything that is that dictatorial will fail. Allowing the scientists and engineers to be innovative and come up with solutions like e-fuels really is our best opportunity to have a more sustainable, environmentally sustainable transportation sector.
We're talking about transportation sector, and transportation is about 22% of all petroleum usage, at least in the United States. Yeah. So that's the one everybody's focusing on. They're not necessarily paying. You don't see the same hype or news around anything else, factories, home heating, etc. It's really focused on transportation energy because it's more than 1/5 of energy usage, and it's very, very visible. Transportation Energy Institute looks at all kinds of transportation issues. Why did you take on this research? I think we got at some of that answer in just talking about we need to have a variety of solutions. But what was the whole process in saying we're going to look more at e-fuels now? And then once we do look at e-fuels, here's some of the things we're going to look at to say, is this scalable? Is this workable? Is this something that we need to talk about a lot more?
Well, at Transportation Energy Institute, we focus on on-road transportation, surface transportation, some off-road stuff as well, but not very much. And when you think about what we're trying to do, our mission is we don't get involved in advocating what the direction of transportation should be, what the goal is. Global leaders have said the goal is to reduce carbon. Our job is to look at how do we do that effectively, efficiently, and in a way that preserves affordable, accessible, reliable energy for every consumer. When we think about the environmental implications of transportation, a third of our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from transportation. So there's a huge opportunity there. You ask, why, people are focused on transportation. I've got two reasons. One is it's a third of our GHG emissions. The other is it is politically easy to point to transportation. Everybody's been around a tailpipe. The politicians know that, so they can talk about transportation as the source of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Very few people have been around a cement factory and seen what that has, or around a power plant. And so, you focus on the topics that resonate with your constituents. We wanted to look at e-fuels for a couple of reasons. One, if we are facing an environmental crisis, waiting for the entire fleet of nearly 300 million vehicles in North America and 1.5 billion in the world to transition to a new vehicle technology is a failed strategy. We cannot convert the world's transportation sector to something new fast enough if we're facing an emergency situation environmentally. Whether you think we're facing a crisis or not, if we want to be serious about reducing emissions, we can't wait. Let's do it. Let's find ways to do it. So of those 1.5 billion vehicles in the world, the only way to reduce their emissions is through the energy they consume. We have to provide lower carbon, lower emitting fuel for those vehicles. And that starts with innovation. We can do a lot throughout the entire petroleum cycle. We can do stuff on biofuels, but there are other things we can do. There's renewable gasoline and renewable diesel. There's e-fuels. There's all these different technologies that may be contributing factors in reducing the carbon intensity of our fuel that will benefit the environment through existing infrastructure and existing vehicles. At the same time, we can bring these new vehicles online. We can bring electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles to market. But as we do that, we're still selling millions and millions of combustion vehicles. We need to fuel them. So that's kind of our purpose in looking at this is we are very bullish on the future of transportation and technology improvements and what we're going to see in terms of our vehicle architecture going forward. But we have a significant population of vehicles that are burning fuel. and we have to be focused on the fuel they're burning. And this is one technology that may help us reduce our emissions.
So when we're talking about transportation energy, we've talked mainly about vehicles that are on roads. And that makes sense. Transportation Energy Institute was a spin-off of NACS, and we fuel motor vehicles. We don't fuel barges. We don't fuel airplanes, at least not yet, in terms of how convenience is defined. However, when you think about the possibilities, the average vehicle is about 11, 12 years old on the road. Mm-hmm. The average airplane is probably double that and still very much viable. The average ship is probably way more than that. And there are no charging stations in the sky or in the middle of the ocean. So is this beyond the Transportation Energy Institute to look at or recommend whether some real immediate applications also might be off-road in other types of transportation?
Yeah, and there's a lot of competition for fuel. And if we start looking at transportation emissions reduction as a whole, take the aviation industry as an example. They're looking very closely at sustainable aviation fuels. Sustainable aviation fuels are produced using the same feedstock we use for biofuels for the on-road market. So now we're looking at a potential competition for feedstocks that need to be used for on-road transportation being diverted to aviation, because in the aviation sector, they're willing to pay more for their fuel because there's a safety factor. You have to make sure the fuel is appropriate for flying because you don't want a mistake in the air. And so when you think about innovation on liquid fuels, you need to be looking at everything. And e-fuels may find a stronger draw in the aviation sector because of the willingness to pay. You don't need to get to gasoline price parity for e-fuels to be viable for air travel. And maybe e-fuels don't make it into our cars. Maybe they go to the aviation sector. But if that happens, what the byproduct is it provides us more feedstock, less competition for the biofuels we can use in our road transportation, which will lower the cost. And so I look at it this way. The more low-emitting fuels we have available for all purposes, the lower the cost of those low-emitting fuels will be. And so if e-fuels become a sustainable aviation fuel product, great, because that's going to free up more product for the on-road market and make it more consumer-friendly and from a cost basis, and that's a good thing.
The other thing is it a little bit of a misnomer that we're going from a transition to one type of energy to another, and that it really is where we need more energy. We need more energy because everything we do requires more energy as we have all these various devices that control our lives. Population increases in some areas and they become more interested in having these devices as well in more modern types of conveniences. But then you have things like AI. AI generates an enormous, requires an enormous amount of power, way much more to create something via AI than actually writing something or taking a picture. Bitcoin, the power required to keep the Bitcoin business in business is way more than printing a dollar bill and passing them around until they don't work anymore. So we're not just looking at how do we transition from one type of energy to another, but how do we develop energy for our requirements that might be significantly more a couple decades from now. And that's I think another reason that it's really vital to look at e-fuels and everything else at our disposal.
Yeah, I focus exclusively on transportation, but with that comes a appreciation for everything around transportation. So if we're looking at the current policies that have been designed to usher us into an era of electrified transportation, the electricity demand for those vehicles is high. I am concerned about fleet turnover. I'm concerned about production capabilities and the ability to actually provide the vehicles that meet these standards. I'm also concerned about consumer acceptance of this technology to meet the standards that have been put in place. But your point on AI is probably more challenging than production and consumer acceptance. Because if artificial intelligence grows at the pace projected, our demand for electricity will double or triple in the next 10 to 15 years. If you look at the last 20 years, we've increased production capacity of electricity by 3% in the United States. So we need to double or triple our production capacity. That is a Herculean effort. At the same time, we're supposed to electrify everything in our homes. We're supposed to electrify our vehicles, power the data centers. I mean, I live in Prince William County, Virginia. It is like the capital of data centers in the world. You have companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon contracting with utility companies to start or restart nuclear reactors
3 Mile
to
Island.
supply their data centers. I think that's brilliant. You've got Google and Amazon looking at modular nuclear reactors for their data centers. That's fantastic. It relieves the pressure on the grid. But the reality is our demand for energy is not slowing down. And if we are seriously concerned about the environmental implications of energy consumption, it is so much bigger than transportation. And while transportation today is about a third of our emissions in the US, if AI takes off, it's going to be a much smaller percentage in the future. And so what are we doing to address the environmental implications of all this energy consumption? Energy consumption is indicative of an improved quality of life, an improved economic well-being of the consumers and the people. That's a good thing. It improves the standard of living. It's a good thing. But if that energy at the same time is polluting the environment, that's not a good thing. And so stuff like e-fuels gives us another tool that we can bring to empower the world in a way that's more environmentally sensitive. And I get so frustrated when policies are just saying, no, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about anything liquid. Everything's electric. Well, guess what? That's not going to work. Consider e-fuels as the electric fuels. It's electricity in liquid form. One of the things that was interesting in our study is there's question, is there enough carbon to satisfy the demand for e-fuels? Yeah, I guarantee you there's enough carbon, not a problem. There's plenty of carbon in the atmosphere and coming out of our factories. Is there enough renewable electricity? There is. The United States has so much renewable electricity production capacity already. Problem is, it's not necessarily where people are living. And it's hard to get that energy into the system through the grid, store it for later use. But if we were to expand our production of e-fuels in the United States, we're actually only going to use, I think, 1% of all the renewable electricity available in the United States to produce all the e-fuels we are planning to produce in the next 15 to 20 years.
Maybe e-fuels.
So there's plenty of supply.
And maybe just e-fuels just needs a better name. Just something that makes it take off. I don't know. Maybe that can be your next research. But, I want to, the name of your report, and it is very new, just came out in mid-November. It's called E-Fuels, Evaluating the Viability of Commercially Deploying E-Fuels in Road Transport. It's available on the TEI website, but I want to, I'm not ending yet. Who do you want to read this and what do you want them to do?
We're releasing it now because it's done and there's a thirst for the industry to understand what our options are. We had an election in the United States, and that is going to significantly alter the policy environment in Washington, D.C. in 2025 when it comes to energy, transportation, and environmental objectives. I don't know that you can have two administrations that are more opposite on those topics than we are about ready to experience. And so it's a whipsaw in terms of policy structure and impact on the market. That being said, there is still a desire to have environmentally sensitive energy. Whether you are a fan of the current administration or a fan of the next administration, nobody, and despite what some people say, energy companies don't want to destroy the world. They don't want to destroy the environment, right? Their priority is to benefit people with affordable energy. And that's what their priority is. They don't want to destroy the environment. That's not their goal, despite what some environmental advocates will argue. If we can provide policymakers with insight to technology like e-fuels as a viable option that in the incoming administration can be produced domestically, can be using domestic resources, create domestic jobs, and support the domestic energy sector and support consumers, that's a good thing. Now, in order for this to be economically viable, we need certain tax policies that are in place now that may be supported, may not be supported in the next administration. So we want industry to understand the options. But when Congress comes back in session, we're going to push this again to make sure that as they are looking at what are our options for energy and environmental balance, this is one of them. And so we really want them to understand there are options out there. They just need to look for them and see how they can support their development.
So it's almost the perfect time to release something like this because we have the handoff from one administration to the other. And if assuming that there's quite a bit of polarity between what one will be seeking and what the other one has sought, there's an awful lot of commonality here and how you can agree, hey, if we want to do this and we want to do this and we want to do this, there's a lot we can talk about here. And essentially that's the goal of TEI, that's why you put out these reports. You want people to have discussions about things that normally polarize conversations and just say, here's some commonalities, here's some things that have been peer reviewed. It is not somebody coming in looking out for someone's best interests, but it's a collective group looking at really smart ideas for what will guide us over the next few months, few years, few decades.
Our leadership and our board does not believe protecting the environment and providing affordable energy are mutually exclusive objectives. You can do them both. We just have to allow the opportunities to be developed. We have to allow innovation to influence the direction of the market. If we do that, we can have a cleaner energy system at affordable prices. We don't have to pick one or the other. It's a political argument that it's either the environment or costs. It's not. We can do both. E-fuels may be one of the tools to help us do that. And I really think I'm hopeful that as this whipsaw teeter-tottering of policy that we've been experiencing in the last couple of decades, that we can find an equilibrium where let's support sensible technology and sensible energy solutions, because reducing emissions is a good thing. Whether you think we're facing a climate crisis or not, reducing emissions is a good thing. And if we can do it in a way that preserves inexpensive energy, why would we not want to? And I don't think there's anybody that's going to argue that reducing emissions affordably is a bad thing. So let's hopefully we can provide some insights to help us do that.
Well, the research certainly points in that direction. And one of many pieces of research that TEI, the Transportation Energy Institute, has out, you can find them all at transportationenergy.org or contact John directly. And I think, John, you're taking submissions for the new name of e-fuels. So how do we come up with a better name? Do we need a corporate spokesman? I think there's also something to be said for, we need to have like vehicles that say powered by e-fuels. How do you show that? Because otherwise it's just another car driving around. So who knows? That's a PR guy thinking of stunts. So maybe not the best ones, but those are a couple stunts off the top of my head.
We got to be careful. When electric vehicles were first being developed, the Germans were bringing vehicles to the States and referring to them as ED for electric drive, but ED means something different in the U.S.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful
which is
how we
your
plan
title.
Things. Exactly. That's exactly what I was talking about.
Glad we were on the same page there. John, Thanks again for joining us. Transportation energy is something we all depend on. Everybody drives about 33 miles a day. It's what our industry is known for, and there's a lot that we need to do to move us forward for not just a transition, but for future energy needs that are just going nowhere but up. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.